NewViews. We're a monthly civic forum here, trying to spark civic imagination through creative agency. Agency is my term in my phrase here, because I have a creative agency, and this is my way of giving it. Trying to put in the work to make sure we have an impact, and we have to put in the work. As David Delmar will be coming up here in a second, but a quote that really stuck out for me in his book, and this is about improving our messaging, is you can recognize an activist by the sweat in their brow. And I'm literally sweating now because I want to make sure that we have a great for you guys now. So I hope that pulls it all together. But I mean, just a few touchstones to kind of guide us here, because civics is tough. I mean, we're talking about issues that impact us all, and I don't think as a society we're really good at it yet. We have to get better at it. We have to prioritize it, and that's what we're trying to hear today. So again, we're trying to embrace civics as a systems-wide approach. So that's, when you as an audience engage, that's what we're going to try and do. We're going to try and think systems level. We are also going to have this great video loop behind us that hopefully you can engage in the chat and talk with us, because that's the goal. Is we want more data. We hope that by the end of this, as a objective milestone, that you have thought more, you've connected more dots. So that's another guideline. Another thing that I've learned from Partners in Health is something called oops and don'ts, or oops and that hurt, ouches. That's the phrase I'm looking for. Whereas, like, if you say something that hurt someone or that landed wrongly, say it. Like, you can raise your hand. You can be like, oh, that landed a little bit. Like, we want to be better at our messaging. So if there's a phrase that I say as a host, as a moderator here, that impacts you, and you're like, Tom, you can do better. The goal is to get better at it. So that's why I'm doing this. And so the oops and the ouches, that's an important touchdown as we get into this. And the last touchstone I want to just ultimately ground ourselves in is respect. We don't want to use fear mongering. We don't want to use like negative fear tactics to get people riled up here. This is a discussion. It's a forum. We're learning through dialogue. So those are some of the frameworks that I want us to base our conversation in. And I ultimately want to bring up, I have my program as Latifa. Are you okay with doing that? Coming up and being our first guest. So the overall agenda, so you all know, is we're gonna have 3 one-on-one conversations to dive deeper with our amazing panelists. And then we're gonna bring all the panelists up to have a kind of ask everybody questions that I think could spark some imagination. Then I'm gonna invite you guys to participate and ask questions so that we can also get your views reflected and answer your questions. And at the end, I'm gonna ask if anyone wants to stand up and be like, wow, because of this, I thought about this. And we'll have you, we'll give you a mic, we'll let you talk. We'll talk to the online audience out there. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. Working through these technical difficulties as well. That's kind of part of the live stream. If as a video producer, if I didn't do it live, it'd never get to you guys because I'd be there editing it and everything. So this is my way of growing and experimenting. So Latifa, I would love for you to come up and join us. Okay, Latifa. So to start us off here, Latifa works for the Neighborhood of Affordable Housing. You have an awesome title that I want to make sure I get right because I have it in my notes, but I don't have my notes pulled up because we're working through the technical difficulties. So could you start by introducing yourself and your new director role at the Neighborhood of Affordable Housing, and just get our audience familiar with how amazing of an impact organization, community-based impact organization NOAA is?
First, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, let's give Tom the So my name is Latifa Ziyad, and I work with the Neighborhood of Affordable Housing in East Boston. It's been around for a little while, 35 years. It still has its founding director, which is actually a really great thing because I get a chance to get the intentionality of the experience firsthand and get handheld through the last 35 years with now a new opportunity for innovation and fresh ideas.
I love that. There's a theme of resiliency in this talk here today. How is your role preparing, and we also have the theme of climate sustainability. How is your role preparing your communities for climate, and how are you intertwining climate and housing?
So, although our organizational name is the Neighborhood of Affordable Housing, my distinct role grew out of all of those human exchanges that happened with the 700 units of housing and the 35 years of partnerships and relationships that we have in the community. And that role actually came out of a resilience conference. So my title within that position is the community building director, resilience and environment. Not in that order, but you know how it goes.
That actually leads perfectly into my next question of, you had a 6-part series on climate, and I'm just curious, what were some of your biggest takeaways from from those sequence of community gatherings that, I know I've seen the photos and videos and edited them together. How amazing was that? What were some of the main takeaways so our audience can kind of learn from those experiences?
So I think what you're talking about is that we responded to a grant through the city of Boston, and this grant actually just allowed us to get food to people, right? Using the federal system of SNAP. So in this kind of market, you just got to be creative. I mean, you can't talk about resilience and not be resilient, right? You got to lead in that space. So how we responded to the grant is that we said, this is a good way for us to connect our mission of climate. Oftentimes people write grants and they get derailed from their purpose. And so how can we bring it closer in? And so before the pandemic hit, we did 0 food. We also did 0 Zoom, right? We were kind of a little antiquated in certain aspects of our work because we weren't challenged like many of you to build outside of the norm, right? So now in this new norm, we responded to this grant that said, how do you connect people with food? Well, we had just gotten in this game where we gave out 200,000 pounds of food in 50 pound packages every week. And we did that not only as ourselves, but through collaboration with other organizations like Soup Kitchens, the East Boston Soup Kitchen, as well as the East Boston Neighborhood Health Center and the East Boston Social Centers, and even the Central Assembly Church of God. So we were connected with all these other organizations and we're giving out all this food. We couldn't do that forever. It wasn't a sustainable model. So what we did is respond to this grant to figure out how we could connect people with resource so they could get exactly what they want as food, and we kind of slow down the turning. What ended up happening is we get this $50,000 grant and we divide it into our outreach sections of concerts, right? Fun way to do it. Listen, my middle name is Party, okay? So anytime I get a grant, I'm thinking about how can I engage people in a way that they don't even know it's work, right? And so what we did is in each of those concerts, we honed in on a specific cultural tsunami. And what I mean by that, we did Mother's Day, we did Father's Day, we did Save Earth Day, right, coming up, right? And we also did things like Climate Preparedness Month, National Preparedness Month. So we put these things, we had even things like Save the Honeybee Day and Vanilla Ice Cream Day, right? Has anyone ever heard of TV Dinner Day? Okay, so these are the things we paired up with, but then we culturally anchored it through, breaking bread and music, right? It's universal. Right, so our community is the largest community in Boston with Latina population, most of which are actually born outside of the United States, right? We're talking about a huge Central American and South American community from Colombia all the way to El Salvador. So we have to build across some cultural boundaries. Actually, we have Salvadorans leading us in this work. So it was centrally led by Salvadoran community. And what we did is we had Latina music, we had Motown, right? And we even looked at some of our local artists across the bridge. And we East Bostoners are kind of in a silo energy. And we don't build across the bridge too much. But we went to Roxbury. And in Roxbury, we looked at Ed O.G. Y'all remember Ed O.G. and the Bulldogs? It's the only national rapper that came out of this area. And so we featured old school hip hop in our lineup. So some of these things were a little bit uncomfortable for the Latino community, and some of these things were right in line with what they do, but the idea was how do we build collaborations through music and culture? And by the way, we slipped them food cards, we gave them blenders so they can get acclimated to new kinds of fresh food. We brought in food trucks. We brought in fresh vegetable trucks. We brought in, you name it, you wanted to be part of the East Boston community because every week it was about giving away gifts. We even gave them food carts because we said 50 pounds. You know how it is to have an older woman lift 50 pounds? So we got these carts that made it actually work so it wouldn't be a burden to the community. So these are the kind of things that happen.
It really, the vibrancy shines from how you talk about it. And that's what I feel like civics is supposed to be about. It's about how we work together and how we build together, whether it's from parties to, our collective housing, education, climate resiliency. I'd like to educate our audience on who I know has a passion about climate, about the work you're doing with related to the coastal, how East Boston is so vulnerable. Like, how are you engaging and bringing in the community so that the resiliency shines, but also from a policy standpoint, how are you turning this problem that it's 90 degrees out there today? That's not normal, people. That is like what we're going to be dealing with, this intensity of weather patterns. How can you prove that collective policy can work as a way to counter or just survive these impending climate intensification patterns?
Sure. So we got a few grants before I came on board in this organization. We got a Kresge grant, and we got a Kellogg's grant. These grants enabled us to do summits. And at this summit, we had upwards of 350 people, residents, nonprofit organizations, local infrastructure, state government, all of these folks in one room to have breakout sessions and sessions at large plenaries with the mayor and Senator Markey and others. And I actually was in that room, not as working with NOAA, but actually as a participant who was leading the resiliency network at the New England Aquarium at the time.
Right.
And our projects were all based in predominantly in East Boston, but also in Chelsea and other adjacent spaces along the coast. And the work was about how do you get communities to be partners with cultural agencies and figure out if we can give them the science and they can give us their experiential knowledge on the ground, and we could be people partners at the table to get resolve done through a policy lens. This work through NOAA, I was able to now take in the middle of COVID, where everything, we shut down our department for a whole year, our education department. There was one person left in the aquarium who dealt with education. I was not one of those. I was one of those people who were home thinking about how the world is changing, like many of you. And what I did is almost to the day, I get a call from Philip Giffey, who's the head executive director of NOAA. He says, we're in the middle of this crisis. We need you to come on board and see what we can do to kind of unearth this issue. And I love problems. Like when I saw there was a job title for resilience, I thought, oh, this is too cool. So what I liked about NOAA is they had historically done some work in the community and the environment. So there were salt mounds. If you notice when you drive through Chelsea or East Boston, if any of you have done that, those things blow off and people breathe that stuff. So about 25 years, we had been in collaboration with Mystic Valley Association, others, to figure out how do we kind of put at least tarps on that stuff so we could breathe a little better. You leapfrog ahead. Now we're doing sensors in people's homes so they could measure, the Logan Airport is right in their backyard, how we can look at the particulate matter in those in their home, and then look at sensors that can read how much it is, and then do some kind of intervention using HEPA filters, right? So we put the scientists in the homes of the people so they can feel empowered and leave tools that can help make it better along the way. We've learned from this. It's a continual learning experience. What we ended up doing was not only did we put these, what we call the Cadillac of the HEPA filters in people's homes, which basically comes out to like a $750 value if you went off the street. How many of us are going to pay $700 per air filter? Not many, right? So we knew our communities really weren't going to do that. It wasn't going to be sustainable beyond those families, those 40 people that we were going to be able to help. So what we did is we looked harder. We went back to the city, said, can we get more resources? Because we need to build out. And to their credit, they fine-tuned it, and we were able to build out to the intentionality of what the original grant was, which was to actually monitor the airplanes and not the gas stoves in people's homes, which was the predominant thing that we were able to pick up with those original sensors. But so the second phase, we're the only group to have these black carbon readers that now you can get the soot off the airplane and we're reading the nitrogen off the planes. This is going to empower people to have real data so they can go back and change policy at Massport and say, look what's happening here at our Condor Park. Look what's happening along your flight patterns. We know you dealt with noise reduction and put a lot of money in that. Let's piggyback off of that and now put in some things around air quality that are sustainable, not just about putting HEPA filters in people's homes. How about reducing it at the source? So these are the tools that now we're empowering and learning simultaneous with our residents.
Oh, yeah, right? Yeah, definitely. This is what happens when you have leadership that involves the community, it's community-led, it listens, and it prioritizes human rights above profits. I mean, people, as you've mentioned before to me, with cardiovascular disease, like if we're not getting that information, they're going to suffer way more costs down the road. So it's important to get ahead of it and be innovative along the way. I'm going to ask you one more question before we continue on until we bring you back up, just because I would be remiss not to touch on housing as a human right. You know, like, how is NOAA leading the charge of that? You know, what is standing in the way of that? And, you know, what are some innovative policies that you're pushing for, you hope for, that will come to fruition this year?
Yeah, so if I could just close up one thing.
Of course.
If I said nothing else, I would say collaboration is everything, right? You can't do this in a vacuum. It forces us to have neighbors because this is something that is regional, right? So we have Winthrop at the table, we have Revere at the table, we have Everett at the table, and we also have partners like Air Inc. who have been doing this work historically and know that work well, or Mothers Out Front, who can galvanize some of the parents that work in the daycares while we work in the high schools and work in the homes and the businesses. So these are the kinds of groups that you have to have at the table. And this is why we had our Air Quality Summit just a month ago, because of the collaboration, and it was light lifting. So I want to go out and say this is never one person, one group's thing. Even though we have this long 35-year history, we have to continually reinvent ourselves with even the new burgeoning nonprofits and businesses, so that we can all be partners and get this thing done right. So about housing, there are 2 CDCs in the East Boston area, East Boston CDC and NOAA, the Neighborhood of Affordable Housing in East Boston. We had the opportunity to respond to the city this year, or in the last couple of years for the 2020, to do over $14 million in rental assistance, right? So that's not just people who are coming to us, that's people who are coming through us and landing somewhere in the region. And so as a larger organization, we took up things outside of our East Boston interests to make sure that the system was able to get housing. That helped over 2,000 families get some rental assistance. We've even had homeowners that have gotten $80,000 for the arrears that they got through this pandemic. And we have uncapped residents that had to pay enormous rents because they didn't have incomes. I mean, 30% of the people in America were not paying rent. So you can imagine how it hit us. It hits real hard. We became social workers in a space that we had never been before. And that's okay, because it really forced us to be neighbors. And that's really just the most important part of civic duty.
Right? Oh, I'm excited for you to come back up here so we can all bounce ideas off each other. I want to stick with the program just because I don't want you to sit down, but I think it's important to stick with the program. And I'm so grateful. Thank you. Wow. See, this is the type of discussion I hope that we can do on a monthly basis, because I feel inspired to act based off of that. You know, NOAA's leading the charge, and I hope that all you out there are finding your own avenues to make an impact. So I'd love to welcome up Amy. Amy is from the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, which is, I'm sure you can do a better job, but essentially think of it as like an incubation hub within City Hall. How cool is that? We're trying to create an innovative civic discussion here, but you are at the core of the heart of our city, leading these innovative challenges and really trying to embrace long-term problem solving. So I guess, to start us off here, could you briefly touch on some of the things the mechanics your team is working on that really get you fired up and you think that our audience would appreciate and be able to support?
Yeah. So if you've never heard of the Mayor's Office of New Mechanics, we're one of the first municipal innovation labs. So they exist in several cities across the world and North America. We started under Mayor Menino. He was known as like the urban mechanic, and it was kind of like a dig because he really focused on like filling potholes and getting trash picked up. Living in a city where those things don't happen is not enjoyable, and you don't get reelected if they don't happen. But there is like this real conversation with like our founding department leaders of, we have this political capital because this guy has been getting reelected for decades, and we have to do something really interesting with it. So we launched this office. I was not there at the time, but through our team really being here and really having this idea at the heart of cities deserve innovation, people deserve to have new ways of thinking introduced on the local level. I think sometimes we hear about, really enormous ideas happening, like, rental relief assistance, et cetera, on the federal level. And you don't always think of like city and local as the place to do that. We are not the team that believes in that. So since our founding, we've been involved in community composting. If you saw the rollout of community composting door to door in Boston, a lot of that foundation really started with a community composting program that we began that was neighborhood-based called Project Oscar. If you've autonomous vehicle testing happened through our team, led by our team in partnership with Newtonomy, to absolutely build on what you were saying earlier about collaboration. Almost every single one of our projects that we do, if it's not explicitly in collaboration with other City of Boston departments, we're often like the weaving piece between all these different departments. We're always working with community-based organizations. And in my time on the team, I've literally worked with NOAA on organizations of like getting like digital equity services, 9,000 units of technology out to constituents who need them. Other colleagues of mine have worked on, there's some fun, I think in particular, like food systems design is something that's been really coming up that's really important. And then really supporting our returning citizens in Boston as well.
Touching on the piece of technology, just as a slight tangent, we don't talk about the right to the internet enough. We don't talk about the right to technology enough that maybe we talk about in our panel up here a little bit more. So it's so amazing that you empowered so many people by doing that in such a short timeline and getting the Boston Public Library involved and trusted institutions and really community building that way. So amazing. Thank you for doing that work and your team. You've been, this workshop is about messaging. How do we improve our messaging? You've worked as a communication director for governors and many leaders across, throughout your tenure in City Hall and beyond. What have you learned about how we message? Is there any like themes that come out that work, that resonate, how you get people involved, what, techniques on what to say, phrases that we should definitely be leaning into, phrases that we should be drifting away from? Take that in any direction you so choose.
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest piece of advice I would give anyone from a messaging perspective is that if you're putting out a message into the world and you haven't talked to the person that your program or your idea is going to be affecting, then you're missing the mark. And I say this, before I came to the mayor's office in mechanics, actually before I came back to City Hall, taking a break to go to grad school, I was running Spark Boston, which is the City of Boston's 20 to 35-year-old civic engagement and leadership program. If you're a Boston resident, applications are open right now. You should apply. But I think one of the things that I really learned from that is I'm a millennial. Gen Z was really coming in as I was leading this organization. And there are some specific like cultural and communications norms that I wasn't fully anticipating. Like certainly when I was coming up, like I got my start in high school in LGBTQ activism and then anti-war and then school funding fights. And I was all in like suburban South Florida. And so like identity was such a big part of messaging when I was growing up. And this is a generation where, and I really appreciate this note. I was having a conversation with a colleague recently, and one thing she brought up was like, identify when you're trying to message, say like a service or a program series or resources, focus on the thing that you're going to be helping. Like if somebody is, a single parent and trying to provide food to their children, there might be multiple departments or multiple programs that might appeal to them. And I think that really thinking about who you're serving and what you're actually going to help them with is really going to connect with that person more than you saying like, you're insert XY here. You're like a, Southerner expat, like, find community in Boston. It's like, well, that kind of hits, but it's not the same as like, if you're looking for new people who share your values, come to this event on a Thursday night.
It really is about building empathy with each other and trying to find these shared values and ultimately have fun together too. That's where hopefully, this is somewhat of a fun conversation out there. I would be remiss not to talk about the Green New Deal concept of Michelle, Mayor Wu on, climate sustainability night. I heard her speak with Pod Save America at the Wang Theater, and I was like almost in tears, thinking like of inspiration, being like, wow, like cities can move fast. Our National Congress intentionally moves slow, and it, there's a recent stat out there or statistic by represent.us where if 0% of our country supports something, federally, there's a 30% chance of it being passed. If 100% of the country supports something, there's a 30% chance of it being passed. Like, that's unacceptable to me. I recognize the realm of federal legislation is maybe without the scope of this room right now, but taking into how cities can move quickly. Can you talk about what about the Boston Green New Deal concept and potentially our state, Governor Healy as well? Like, what inspired you the most? What would inspire our audience from a technical, from a policy perspective, however you want to take it? What fires you up?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest thing that fires me up is the mayor's commitment to free public transit. And I will say this as somebody, I worked in the Patrick administration, I worked briefly in the Baker administration. I'm on my third mayor, and something that I've consistently heard from constituents is that transit is one of the reasons why they cannot see Boston as their permanent home, or they can't see Massachusetts as their home, because there are so many different forms of housing that people can find. But if they can't get around our city, if they can't get to different opportunities, if they can't get to grad school, if they can't get their family members, their community members, they will not stay in that place. And I live just outside of, I live in Dorchester. It's a wonderful neighborhood. Come to Fields Corner, come support our amazing local businesses. But I live off of the 23 bus route. And not only do you hear from, both constituents and then the transit workers themselves that it is faster, it reduces time if you don't have to pay for that public transit. Early reports have indicated that I think it's 25 fewer car trips that a person will take because they have access to free public transit off of these routes. And there's only 3 routes. We're testing them. We had to work with the federal government to expand the pilot timeline from 6 months to 2 years. A lot of you are here in entrepreneurship. How often have you ever heard of 6 months giving you enough data to figure out anything? Genuine question. And I say that to say, like, we have to give ideas the time to test. It's one of the things I love the most about my department, and it's one of the things I really love and respect the most about Mayor Wu, and then also just the amazing local leadership. The bench is so deep in Massachusetts. When you were bringing up, we're affecting change in the local level now and taking to the federal government. I met Ayanna Pressley when she was first running for city council, and like literally the tagline between her and Tito Jackson when they were running for office was like, we're the best concert you've never been to of Pressley and Jackson. And like, that sits with me of like, these local leaders take themselves to the national level, and it's up to us to really lift and support them up. And then also showing them like, what are the policy priorities that we have for them to uplift moving forward? Ayanna Pressley has done incredible, this is not related to Green New Deal, I apologize, but she's done incredible work around free public transit, but also student loan debt. And especially as a leader of 20 to 35-year-olds, that is like one of the other biggest reasons why people can't see themselves staying in Massachusetts, because how can they afford it when they're paying anywhere between $300 to over $1,000 every month to pay off the education that just gets them in the door, which I look forward to hearing David talk about that.
I'm also super excited about that. To bring this portion of the program to a close, what programs out there, whether it's office hours or anything, could entrepreneurs in our audience participate in with the Office of New Urban Mechanics?
Sure. So on our website, boston.gov/newmechanics, or just Google that, you'll find us. We have very specifically carved out office hours. So we have office hours from 2 to 4 every Tuesday, and then from 9 to 10 every Wednesday. Come check us out. Send us an email at newurbanmechanics@boston.gov, depending on like what your organization is. Whoever is the most qualified, and we might not even be the right team, but we can at least connect you to the right folks internally. I would also say that check out our Smart Cities playbook. And I say this to say I'm in an entrepreneurship space. I think that there's a real idea of like innovation team at the city. Let's throw 1 million sensors and then hope people get it. if a sensor program is not well defined, is not with community organizations that are willing to care and explain things and explain to people how data works, then we're just giving people technology and data that they don't know how to use. So check out the Smart Cities Playbook, then reach out to us. We can't wait to talk to you. And also, like, if you have an organization where you're looking for speakers, or even if just like you would like some ideas on who to get connected to within Boston City Hall, we're happy to help. We work with nonprofits, startups, and academic organizations all the time.
Let's give it a round of applause. Excited to bring you all back up here. Thank you. David Delmar, everybody, is our next one-on-one conversation here. And we created this awesome video that I was going to start our conversation with for Del. And I'm going to try and play the audio for both our online audience and our in-person audience. I'm going to play it from my laptop. We'll see if this works, because normally this will be on the screen, so you won't be able to see Del's passion, but hopefully you'll hear it. But Del, just to, I'm sharing a video from his recent book launch at the Dorchester Brewing Company. And if you haven't gotten his book yet, I will be speaking about it a lot this program, because it's really impacted and gotten me fired up. So let's.
One of the great threats to the struggle for economic liberation is that we don't all agree on what the word liberation actually means.
We'll skip the video.
Means having the time necessary to live in a way that supports.
Let's see if I want to get the title exactly right. We have What We Build with Power, the Fight for Economic Justice in Tech. And, you know, if you guys aren't familiar with Resilient Coders, teaching Black, Indigenous people of color how to code, and then also connecting them with amazing employers as well. And Del, I guess to start this off, you know, why did you write the book? You know, what was the impetus behind it? Because I want the audience to be able to know the why, I guess, the purpose behind it. And then we'll kind of dive deeper. I feel like the video addressed the why to a degree. But so why did you feel the need to transition from a boot camp that springboarded people over the wall into the tech world into we need to build parallel systems and ultimately change the system?
Yes. The book was written out of frustration. You made this analogy about catapulting people over the wall into tech spaces, and to extend that metaphor a little bit, what we were finding year after year is that all we're doing, not all we're doing, because Resilient Coders does great work, but we were just taking people by the ankles and flinging them into spaces that were often hostile spaces. And people we were almost normalizing the existence of the wall. And you do this for long enough, you become frustrated with the persistence of the wall. And you become frustrated at the fact that too many people, we were becoming routinely misunderstood. People were thinking that we represented some sort of a fix in an education to workforce system that otherwise we subscribe to. And that's fundamentally not what we are. We are challenging a system that we see as fundamentally corrupt and broken, and privileging a small group of people. Now, you have enough conversations with prospective employers over the course of the years, and you start to realize that not enough is changing to the degree to which it needs to change. We can serve 90-ish people a year and put them into environments where they're making a lot of money. But ultimately, what we were doing was swimming against the current. And at a certain point, you start to wonder, when do we change the current? When do we have a conversation about the fact that we shouldn't have to exist? Resilient Coders should not exist. Resilient Coders should not exist. It is a Band-Aid on I had a friend say, forgive the violent metaphor, I have a friend that said, calls it a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Now, in 2020, the moment that I realized that I had to write the book right then and there was that in 2020, we have this demo day every cohort, which essentially is when interviewing starts between our graduates and prospective employers. And ours was scheduled for April of 2020. We have one fundamental promise that we make to all of our students. If you get through this, if you put in the work and you graduate, we can't plop you into a job because it's a programming job and you need to be able to prove that you can program, but we can put you in front of employers and you can make the case for yourself. And we were about to default on our promise. Every single one of our employers pulled out a couple of months ahead of demo day. So I went around to everybody who's ever entertained a conversation with me and said, I need you to come through for me, for us, and hire somebody from this cohort. And I spoke to a lot of software engineers and they all said, well, I would love for my company to hire from resilient coders, but we can't. And I have no power here because I am but a software engineer and nobody listens to me. I have no power. To which I would say, my friend, you might be a member of the most empowered workforce in the history of workforce. If you can find other people at your company who feel the way that you feel, you can get together and say, this is what we need to do. We need to hire X, Y, Z number of people. Here's how we're going to do it. Boom, 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 boom. You approach leadership in the right moment at the right time. And I started directing people to this thing that I published being like, this is how you do it. In other spaces, you all might recognize this as organizing, right? This is basically what it was. We started to organize software engineers in the spring of 2020. And then 2020 being the year that it was, May ends with the murder of George Floyd. And then these companies came out with statements. And then the people that we'd been working with said, that's not going to cut it. We would like to see boom, 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 boom. And companies came back. We actually ended the year with more employers than we had students. And the reason that became the moment that I needed to write this book is because I had been frustrated. And here is this counterculture streak that is alive in tech. There are people out there who want to do the thing correctly. And so I had this, janky little blog post that I was directing people to of basically how to organize. I don't know if I used that word, but how to organize at work. And I was like, all right, now I'm listening to people because I was sending people out. What did your manager say? Like, how did this go over? Are you finding people? And I was just writing it down and collecting all these notes. And I wrote actually most of the book on my phone. That was the impetus of the book. I was like, we need to just get this out there and make it really easily accessible to folks so that it's not just us, a small group of us just having one-on-one conversations, but something that can scale.
There's so much I can follow up with you, Adele, on that. It's
I'll make my next answer shorter.
No, please keep it coming. I hope everyone enjoys these insightful reasoning. I read the book, again, can't highly recommend it enough. The culture shift that you mentioned, culture shifts policy and gets buy-in, as you've referenced. So it's important that hopefully that this video program, to a degree, is part of the culture. There's more counterculture stuff going on like this. Del, you speak of kind of building parallel structures as at least feasible action item for us outside of this, at least to push the needle between these four quadrants that you've talked about when I had you on my last show. The four quadrants of labor/employees, employers, education systems, and our civic government systems. Since we last talked in 2020 about this in a kind of format like this, have you seen progress on collaboration between those four quadrants in terms of a collective policy? And if not, which obviously we haven't seen the degree of progress that we want, is there anything that you can point towards that we could put our efforts behind to help?
Yeah, the short answer is 100%. There's been an uptick in ability to collaborate. I mean, there are offices like neuromechanics, and I really believe in change being funded to the extent that it can be by elected government rather than philanthropy, and that's another whole soapbox that I can get on later. It's a question of who is really in power, and what people do with their power. Chef. I think that we have to name what happened to the social contract over the 20th century. Back when we had a manufacturing economy, that sort of pie chart, I guess, right? Those four different quadrants of institutions that work together to put people into jobs and advance our economy. after the move away, during the move away from a manufacturing economy to sort of like a knowledge economy, we became very reliant on college as a pathway to knowledge work. And then college became expensive, and then more expensive, and then more expensive. And you begin to realize that access to good jobs is a resource, like any other resource, like oil, like gold. And what happens to valuable resources? They are hoarded. They are hoarded because you can derive value from selling access to that resource. If opportunity is a resource and it's being hoarded and sold to the highest bidder, we have a fundamental problem with the way our economy can advance, the way our society can function. And what ends up happening is that you end up with a situation with a bifurcated economy. Some people have access to the $160,000 to $200,000 degree that gets them in the door at the job that they want, and some people do not have that access. This is especially pronounced in a city like Boston, the land of Harvard, BU, MIT, Northeastern, BC, blah, 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 blah. So you have people that are coming in from away, they go to our illustrious institutions, and then they work. And the people who are born and bred in Boston don't have access to those jobs. So you end up with two economies. Question is, what do we do about the fact that we have those two economies? Who is responsible for fixing it? And I put out this question on LinkedIn a while ago, asking this question. So we have this bifurcated economy. Is it up to industry to fix? Is it up to government to fix? Or both? And everybody basically came through and was like, yeah, some version of both, right? Like urban mechanics. I mean, that's the whole premise of a lot of the work that you all do, as far as I understand it. But this is an interesting time, right? Change is local. Right now, change is local. The federal government, to the extent that we can see any sort of change nationally from our federal government right now, it's the cavalry ain't coming. The cavalry ain't coming. And so we need to find some way to repair our economy and thereby our institutions and our society that does not require dependency on the federal government at the moment, but working locally with our local government, with our local communities, and to the extent that our local communities and our local government can work together, I believe we have an opportunity to fix the city.
That definitely deserves a clap. Thank you. With regards to that, education as a right, not a commodity. It, to a degree, started with the property tax funding education system of California, which you loosely touched on in your book, which is really amazing. How do we, as a city, as a state, push forward that promise of education through our public institutions? I mean, there's also the concept of building those parallel institutions like resilient coders, unions to a degree, essentially is what you're doing. But is there any education funding system out there? You referenced a few in your book that you feel like are a step in the right direction, and then also how would you build upon them?
Yes, so I have some thoughts on this. So first of all, something that is new since the book is, I don't know if you all saw, I think it was last week, a bunch of local community colleges are now free to Boston residents. That is transformational. That's a huge deal. And I would love to see more of that happen across the board with other institutions, other cities and states. So Tom was referencing California. I read this wonderful book that you all should read called The Sum of Us. I'm forgetting the subtitle, What Racism Costs All of Us and something. But it's by Heather McGee, and you should all look it up. And one of the points that she makes in this phenomenal book is that over the course of the, especially latter half of the 20th century, there was a backlash to the civil rights movement, and there was a divestment from public institutions that were meant to desegregate America. And one of these is higher education. Before this time, back in, I believe it was the 70s and 60s, state colleges were still free or affordable. And that was intentional because state governments really saw economic mobility as an important part of everything. And by the way, those of you who are from other countries know this, right? My family, we're from Latin America. Like, we know that, like, the best colleges in Latin America are free ones. In Europe, the best, a lot of the best institutions are the free ones because it's good for the entire economy. We no longer do this in America because when the federal government, so we all know the GI Bill, quick tangent. So the GI Bill, for those who don't know, essentially was meant to educate a generation of veterans coming home from World War II. Now, what you might not have learned in middle school is that what it did was that it sent white veterans to college and Black veterans to segregated trade schools. The reason I bring this up, and by the way, this is all from Heather McGee's book, the reason I bring this up is because during this time, the federal government was still understood by American voters as upholding the traditional racist hierarchy, right? Now, in the 60s, you've got Kennedy and you've got Johnson, and many voters understood the federal government to have flipped, to be trying to upend traditional racist hierarchy in favor of civil rights. So this is when we talk about the Southern strategy. This is when white Democrats pull out of the party of Kennedy, this, that, and the other thing. And this is when the neoliberal revolution that really ramps up in the 70s and 80s takes hold, divestment from public institutions. We have an opportunity to reverse this trend and reinvest in public institutions. I don't think that we can begin a conversation about equitable employment if people still got to pay money for college. That if you got to pay money for college at all, we can't begin a conversation about equitable employment if somebody has a better access to equitable employment than other people do. At Resilient Coders, our program was free and paid because we were competing with jobs. Like, people need to feed their family, and so we paid everybody who went through the program. And I think that this is a necessary step, is making sure that education is free across the board, and that's something that is starting locally. And I'm excited to see that hopefully expand out nationally. I promised you I was going to be shorter.
I wouldn't change anything about anything there. That was exactly that's the point of this forum, is to dive deeper into these structural issues so that we can actually put more brain power and energy into it. Cynthia.
I do have a question. So you mentioned, like, how do we, not just necessarily how do we, but we need to revert back into divulging funding into the public sector. But I think that I would say that system that operates exactly as it should be will never actually be equitable. So everything that we have built on is built upon systems of inequity. So we, in my view, will never actually get there until we just restructure from the start from step 0.
Yep.
And so with that kind of in mind, I don't expect you to have an answer, but also, where do you think we could even start from a ground zero?
I have a good, let's build into this. I want to welcome you both up because I feel like this is a question that, this is the point of it, is that now we can kind of embrace the forum concept to build upon, just to add a stat to that. So you gave the GI Bill stat. Let me move this up here so I can see you guys a little bit more. John Oliver just gave this stat that, oh no, you gave the GI Bill stat. I think you gave this stat, Del, where out of the 142 billion so the GI Bill stat was of that, and this is in John Oliver's housing discrimination episode, to give him credit. 98% of the now $400 billion went towards white families post-GI Bill investment with mortgages and home ownership. We are seeing this almost same exact number that Del gave the stat of. I think 142 billion has gone to Black entrepreneurs through investment. And that's 1.2 billion, I think, went to them, which is, it's just so unacceptable. But you can literally draw the parallels of, you build wealth through these different types of strategies. So nothing's really changed, which is, again, unacceptable. So I would like to kind of frame that in the sense that, and really asking Cynthia's question of, how can we overcome these inequities where, so many people have to jump 6 feet when some only have to jump 2. How can we begin to get to the root of these problems? Right. Well said. Well said to that. So you guys, anyone feel free to jump in here and let's build upon and see where we go with this.
I would say like probably one of the systems that I think we're doing well at supporting, but I think it's the stopgap, but it's an industry that is like economically unfeasible in the way that it's currently structured, but every single one of us depends on is childcare. So when I was running Spark Boston, we had a conference on childcare, and it really came from one of our council members is the director of Mass Now. Another one of our council members is this alum, anyways, was the founder of a childcare startup you might have heard of called Otter. I think they just went through their Series A last year. I think they got funding through Andreessen Horowitz. But it really came from this place of childcare in Massachusetts alone can range anywhere between $250 a month to like $3,500 a month.
Which is absurd when you consider that Boston is trying to be a city in the US.
That is exactly why we are currently taking action. So one of the great community leaders behind this, who's the work right now, is Kristen Mix-Swain. She's fabulous. But one of the things that she's really trying to do is not only help connect funding to childcare providers, especially family FCCs, family childcare centers. I might be messing up that acronym, so I apologize. But that's specifically those like small family entrepreneurs, the person who's based in your neighborhood, who can handle a certain amount of children, can often take on infants, which require higher ratios. And that is like the kind of work that we need to protect these systems. But at the end of the day, you look at New Mexico. New Mexico during the pandemic got federal dollars. And they said, you know what, here's an idea we're going to pilot for longer than 6 months. It's going to be free childcare available to everybody. It was so popular that they had a ballot initiative where they passed funding for childcare, and it's free and available to everyone in New Mexico. And that's the thing, right? Like, it is my great passion for city and local government, especially local government, is that we can test ideas, we can hear what constituents want the most, and we can try something for a period of time. And then you don't have to spend an entire presidential first or second term to justify it, get it passed by Congress, and then test it out. So yes, we need to improve as a child-friendly city. This administration, and I will also say in the Walsh administration, we worked on this too, really to better understand that issue. But let's talk about something where if we just prioritized it from the federal level or even from the state level, we could transform a system and make having families accessible for everyone.
Do either of you two want to, I have a question that I think could be somewhat similar, but I want to make sure you guys have, Latifa, do you have any perspective on this equity? We touched on it in our brief conversation of like, we've allowed this root problem to grow legs and we haven't addressed the actual problem for decades, I just would love to get you into the conversation on that perspective.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about education because I think it starts there. It is the embryo that grows into many things, right? And for me, there's also resource, right? We have to redefine values, right? In the sense that I think we share them, but we kind of have to unearth what that really looks like. And what I mean by that is people look at money and it becomes the thing. It becomes more valuable than people, right? Where people-centered resource, it should be the most valuable thing, right? And when I say that, I don't mean it's bigger than the planet. It doesn't mean it's bigger than the plants, the animals, or the ants, right? I mean that in the spectrum of things, you have to value people. So all the different systems that serve that speak to that, not speak to the money's bigger. What is real money? What is real resource? Real resource is things that can be exchanged to help get something done and hopefully have a collaborative, synergistic effect that everybody's kind of rising with that time, right? And so when you look at this dollar thing, it becomes almost a noose around your neck if you're serving that versus this output that you want to have as a result. Somewhere in the middle of that is intentionality, right? So when you have the right intentionality, all the systems at play tend to start to serve that intentionality, and you almost don't have to really become a mechanic to all those things because they kind of tectonic plates start shifting into the right direction, right? But it all starts with intentionality. You could sit in a room and just stare in the dark for a long time, and you'll start thinking of ideas to get stuff done without even moving, without even collaborating. It's just kind of it comes to you in that intentionality seat, right? And then you do have to act on it on some level. But simultaneously, you'd be surprised on how many things are starting to move in a direction to help you get that done, right? I think what we do to ourselves is we take on the weight to think if we don't do it, it's not going to happen. And it's not true. It does mean that everyone has to play a part, even if it's a seemingly minute part. But in actuality, the number of people are getting incentivized by the same problem. And all you're doing is kind of like parallel walking with them to solutions. And everybody's walking within their own gift to get it done. I can't do what you do as well as you do it, and you may not be able to do all the things I do well. That's the money. That's the resource, right? When we tap into that, we can get anything done. There'll be no insolvable problem.
Can I add one small thing on
Please do.
there? I think the other piece when we're talking about collaboration and we're talking about getting to the resource, part of the resource is that our civic fabric is dependent on who shows up to public process. And I say that from the perspective of like, who applies to city jobs to be the voices inside these buildings? Who shows up to community meetings? There is a fabulous researcher by the name of Catherine Einstein at Boston University. She's an extremely talented political scientist. I'm a bad student in that I absolutely forget her co-author, and he's lovely, and I'm sad. But she and they both put out a piece of research a couple of years ago that basically they looked at the attendees of community meetings on the very local level, and they looked at everybody who attended community meetings. They cross-registered it with voter database, basically like property ownership rules, et cetera. And what they found out was that overwhelmingly, the people who show up to community meetings are typically retired. They are almost exclusively property owner. As you can imagine, they are mostly white and they are mostly male. I was surprised by this. Party identification was not a leading indicator of civic engagement. But when you think about like, why don't I have more of, I'm sorry? It's absolutely.
I don't have so making it anywhere is a whole commute.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it takes me 48 minutes to get from my train station
Yeah.
to CIC to come to work now.
Yes.
And the meetings are at 4 p.m.
Oh, it's totally arranged, right? The meetings can be at 4 p.m. The meetings can be at 5:30. When I was running community meetings and as the head of constituent services for Alston and Brighton, my job was, all right, I have to have this abutters meeting so that we can figure out whether or not the neighbors want the liquor license for this particular restaurant, or if this lot can become a 4-family when only a 2-family is like permitted. And like, you're assuming that people are trying to hold a 6 p.m. meeting when you have to get all the way to Oak Square in Brighton when somebody works downtown. It's impossible, but also how can you get those things done, especially in the pre-Zoom era? And I think that's like also one of the benefits and like beauties of like accessibility of civic spaces. There's some legislation, I believe, on Beacon Hill right now about increasing access to public meetings via virtual options and have it not violate open meeting law. But anyways, long story short, show up to your community meetings, especially if you're a Boston resident. I would strongly encourage you to go and sign up for your Office of Neighborhood Services newsletter. They post a lot of the community meetings that are in your neighborhood. And also, like, as a former ONS liaison, if your apartment ever catches on fire, they will be the person to show up and then make sure you get sheltered that night, which is a different thing than what I said. But I think it's really important to say that like everybody is always struggling a lot, but it's our job to, show up as well, but also let people know what are the reasons why you can't show up so that that person can say, oh, hey, I know you live 2 streets over. How do you feel about a 5-family going up, or like, this business getting this license? Are they good neighbors? And building that introduction.
Can I say something to this?
Of course.
So I work for city government, these 4 mayors. And I can say that it's not just about showing up, absolutely, right? It's about invite. Yeah. And when I worked for government, I knew before you showed up for the interview who's getting the job. Why? Because they had the strongest relationship capital in the room. And some of them really didn't have to be that great, right? So it's not like when people start to get the feel that, oh, maybe I've seen, Uncle Joe show up for 20 different interviews and not get picked, they start to like lose hope that the process is really working for them, but more or less against them, even if they don't understand why, right? And so until you fix the real outcomes of a thing so that it seems like it has authentic character, people will unsubscribe to that thing, right? Now, I will say that showing up to that meeting in your community is the beginning, right? Because I happen to benefit from being the daughter of a community activist. She was in their face, and then thus she passed almost 30 years ago. I still benefit from her showing up at meetings. Still today. Every job I've ever gotten, every political position, every nonprofit position, every school I've ever gone to, I benefited from her work and the value she instilled in me to show up regardless of how easy it is, right? So the thing is, when you are in a community that you may have a smaller voice to the systems that are at play, those meetings might happen at 2:00 in the afternoon and most people work, but guess what? I have a meeting with my supervisor says, you know what? There's something really important happening between 2 and 4 today. I need to do that. I'll stay after on a Saturday and get extra hours in if that's what you need, because I need to have this happen. And that's the civic duty that we have to do with antiquated systems that are not really set up to invite. And I hate to say that, but that's what it's going to take, personal sacrifice on every level to really start to make things equitable.
I will come to you in a second, Naris, just for the question. I just wanted to say like 2 or 3 quick things, and just one last exercise per se before we dive into audience questions, which is, you bring up this concept of civic duty, and we all have our own ways of giving back. I don't think to me, the reason why I choose the word civics is because I feel like it has a much more inclusive connotation culturally than politics. And I almost want to see if we can reinvestigate the word tax almost and kind of change that back to like a civic duty, because we can all give back in certain ways. We don't have to look at it as like, oh, I'm losing my money. I mean, right now we're not seeing as much return on investment with the taxes we pay. But if we kind of eliminated that phrase and we turned it to like a civic duty, it almost makes me think of the works administration that Dale referenced in his book of the post New Deal concepts of like, we came up with these big plans to build things. Whether today, can we build things in tech? Can we build things in climate? Can we actually just pay people to have a better, more staffed government? Because there's a lot of ways we could look at this. So I guess my exercise for a second, and because I might turn to Dell for a sec, like, do you see any current strategies, whether it be Code for America or any other examples of almost like a public works program that invites people in, gives them fair employment, and treats them with respect as well. But could we come up with any more beacons of projects where, for example, like, I think that we should deprioritize our military spending, but we have this huge fleet. Why aren't we sending it out to clean up the Pacific garbage patch? Like, that's almost like a public works program of like reshifting our resources to something that we should prioritize. Like, that's just an out of the box idea, and I welcome any other out of the box idea, but I want to turn to the panel to see like, what could we invite our citizenry, our Commonwealth into for more public works programs or even civic duty invitations?
Well, I'll jump in since you kind of threw it at me. However, I actually think that Latifa's segment earlier was a really great example of that. When she's talking about, we submitted a grant application, this, that, and the other thing, and we got the money, and then we had to lobby to actually use that money in the way that we intended to use it. I actually think that is essentially, in a lot of ways, public works. And I think that to the extent that we can do more of that, the better. I have the benefit of participating in a grassroots effort to make sure that we have the right people getting access to being trained for green jobs, essentially like HVAC, like new HVAC installation. The mayor just rolled out or proposed this new budget that has a lot of money allocated to green technology, and that's going to take workers. And I'm part of a grassroots effort to essentially make sure that the people who are getting trained for those jobs are the people that have so often been overlooked for good jobs that have an opportunity to grow. And I think that is actually very directly public works, and that it comes from the federal government. Those are federal dollars to, well, some of those are federal dollars that come through cities and states to make sure that we are able to make some of those changes. But I think they're out there. I think most people just don't know about them. And they don't tend to be as glossy. I mean, there are literally like public works posters that people have in their dorm rooms from the Franklin days, right? But we don't have that now, but it's out there.
Either you two, do you have any thoughts or?
I mean, I think Rick, what you said was really right on point. I think the fluidity of having governmental relationships that think outside the box and stick to that intentionality is awesome. One of the key reasons we were able to take advantage of the air quality grant was because they had 3 rounds right after each other, within weeks of each other. So the first round had 10 applicants. We applied. This was the first time we're getting in the skin in this game. You didn't know what we was doing. We just kind of came up with something that sounded good and addressed some of the issues. We got rejected, and we didn't take it personal. I know grants is a numbers game as well as a relationship game. I said, okay, let's get back in the game again. Really, within 3 weeks, I had to have a meeting with them, tell me what's wrong with it, take what they said seriously, tell them where what I put in does solve their intentionality, make things clear, and then submit again. The second round came, we were the only ones that got the grant. Okay. Then after that, after we got the money we wanted, we then went back and said, this was great, and we did what we could with what you gave us based on what we knew when we applied. However, if you give us a little bit more, we can retool this and get closer to accomplishment of what we said we were going to do. And to Wu's credit, to even Kim Janey's credit, who actually, I think initially that we got the grant under, those mayors were thinking outside of the box. Marty Walsh was thinking outside. Menino, we're still living off of steam of more than potholes, of all the innovative teams he brought to the table to get stuff done. So, that intentionality lives beyond the essence of even our bodies. And when we realize that that's such much more of a rich legacy to leave, we will go out of our way to give out the real capital, which is us really taking a loan on this planet and being able to take those gifts that were given to us and funnel as many to the right purposes as possible.
I know that we're running low on time, so I want to kind of like get the audience involved because you guys have been so great. I want to give Nerith a chance. If you want, you can stand up and actually just say your thoughts as well as this experiment of testimonials here.
So much, so inspiring. Tom, thank you for arranging this. It's such wonderful passion and so inspiring to see such thoughtful people who are solving such important problems for us. So thank you so much. I'm Nerith. I'm a physician at the Brigham and work with my wife on this project for human flourishing. The question was based on sort of some random reading in global health and in health equity. We worry a lot about sort of these incentives. And then I stumbled across this way that Ireland ended up deciding how to create the abortion law when they ended abortion, the illegality of abortion. How would they create something that did it? And they went back to like an original old tradition, one that was captivating to me, and I would love your thoughts on it. Sortitions, like a sortition movement. So it's a slight repurposing of democracy. So just work with me. It's a slight process. We now have technologies to understand what the structure of our societies are, and we can use some of the things that we've learned from running studies to like choose a random sample from those that's fully representative on whatever metrics we choose to do it. Then we make an invitation to those people to be the decision makers in our society. It's flipping like democracy, like the key element of our democratic system is, and some of the things that we're most concerned about is how are people making decisions for us and how can we eliminate the bias and the gender gap and the diversity. So all they made this propensity map to create the governing body of this. They then send an invitation. You have been welcomed to a civic service. We would like to offer you a 1 or 2 year term in which you will come. We'll pay you twice the current minimum wage for you to join us. And we recognize you don't understand legislation or the rules or climate change or these ones, but we have all of these amazing advisors that all of our people who get elected the traditional way, also, we have no expectation of them having to, they will be your advisors and you'll serve in this great and glorified role. What instantly happened, right? Instant gender diversity changed. There was far more of a proclivity for people who are in the underserved communities, like and poorer communities in the middle class to serve, right? And there was a much lowering, and they had to do different incentives for the rich people to serve. But it has radical possibilities for changing things suddenly like that. We talked at this equity dinner that Lachlan Farrow had organized for Equity in Boston. He's the head of the Schweitzer Foundation, about how are hospital boards structured? Like, how can we do experiments like this locally? Who gets to be on hospital boards? The people who have lots of money. How it should be structured by sortition societies that are based on the communities that those hospitals serve. What would be different? I think so much would be different. Could we do that in Boston? Thank you. Sorry for walking there. Sorry, they did it in Ireland. The law that these people created, even though none of them were legal experts, was accepted by 75% of Irish society.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Well, I think at least one thing that sort of jumps to mind is that we technically, we have this role of like boards and commissions in our societies. So the Zoning Board of Appeals, to a certain extent, the Licensing Board, other boards and commissions on the city, state, and local level. Some of these are like, I think, a little bit more ceremonial. Some of them have like a lot of prescription like written into them. But I would say, especially if there's like an issue that you care about, that's certainly one way to take, not exactly the spirit of what you just suggested, but that when I think about the kind of housing that we want to see, the Zoning Commission is one of the bodies that somebody could submit their resume for, become part of. And that is literally the commission that makes changes to our zoning code. There are professionals who make their suggestions, but they are the ones who vote on it. And we have these institutions in place that are a little bit like less radical what you're talking about. We're going to be rolling out participatory budgeting soon. But there's also, Cambridge has participatory budgeting, and then also our Mayor's Youth Council, actually, they have about $1 million that they decide on projects and then work with city departments. So I'll be excited to see things like that evolve a little bit more.
The invitation matters, though.
Yes, totally.
I think my perspective is that it sounds like a really amazing idea that I have trouble figuring out how it would work. In that any given issue, there are some people that are just closer to the fire than others.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about, let's say we're talking about housing, if we were to really do it randomly, well then do we really take into consideration the perspective of a wealthy person in Belmont and somebody who lives in affordable housing in Eastie? Are those opinions equally valid? And I'm sure that there are issues in which everybody might have an equal stake. Military funding or something, I don't know. But what I'm bringing to, in my background, I have seen a lot of, in tech, I've seen a lot of efforts that are meant to level the playing field for everybody, and they have routinely turned into other tools of bias. Like, oh, we're not going to look at bachelor's degrees, we're going to do a coding assessment. Okay, well, I was going to pass the coding assessment because of the background and blah, blah, blah. And so I think that there must be a way to do that in a way that is equitable. And I think that'd be very hard to really map out depending on the issue. That's a good idea.
I think there is definitely a lot of dynamic that needs to be, checks and balances put in place. But I think it's the only way we're going to have a sustainable, equitable system, to be honest. And I think it's actually simultaneously happening. I mean, the globe is small, right? What you're doing in Ireland is done maybe in a different name, in a different way somewhere else. But there are urban mechanics looking and analyzing what's working, taking best practices, parsing them apart and pulling them back contextually for different areas. And centralized governance of issues, which is what you're talking about, the people who are most affected by that need to play a central role in the leadership of the resolve of the thing. It's the most fairest thing you can do, because why should all the other people be burdened by it who are not suffering from it? They have no solution to it, nor do they have the passion to drive to those solutions, right? Where you could talk to those people who are most affected and they'll tell you 10 things that should have been done 20 years ago that could have worked, that works culturally with how they think through things. This was also part of our work for the air quality stuff. I wanted to force the Cadillac into people's homes. I wanted them to have the Austin air. It's the best. 5 years you get from this, and they're huge, and they make a lot of noise. And people said, oh, we don't want it. It's big, and our apartments are small in East Boston. I said, get over it. Put a plan on it. I was like, no, it's just too big. Well, you know, you got to cut down the $300 by getting a partner, but that's still out of reach. I said, okay, well, we want the $100 one. The $100 one, anybody can get the $100 one. But you know what I did? I let some people get the $100 one, so they could experience the $100. They could touch it, they could feel it, they could see how it affected them. And then they felt like they had ownership of it. Next thing I know, people are asking for the $700 one because they heard the comparison of how much better that works. Then I had organizations like the library say, we don't even want it. It's too loud. So what do? It's not effective if it doesn't work culturally into a space. So we went looking. We got some box fans that we started building that were authorized through the EPA. But then it was like, it's big and it's bulky. What is it saying about the quality of what we think about the people? I said, who cares? It's gonna have good air. They said, no, we want it to look pretty. I said, okay, what do you want to do? They researched centrally led by those who were most affected. And they came up with a smaller box that made less noise and was cost effective for $100. Anybody could get it. And then we were able to do it. And I felt better about the solution, but it would have to be centrally led by those most affected to make it work.
Wrapping up.
Yeah, I know we have.
There's so much more we could talk about with these amazing leaders, visionaries, activists, however you want to call and describe them. They are out there fighting for a better world. And that's what we need is, I feel like Dell's call to action at the end of the book was, we need more people on the field. We need the whole team out there fighting for this better world. We can do it. I mean, my quick last pitch there that sparked to me is like, in order to truly achieve equity, we have to be bold enough to be like, we should create some type of reparations package, because we cannot heal unless we go back to the root of the problem and actually build better structures. And just, if it comes down to resources, like let's create a new playing field. Why can't we do that? And I think it's a combination of will, energy, and ultimately talking about it, which is why I'm so grateful that we've all been here in the forum today. I really encourage everyone to continuously participate in this, and we'll continue to get better. Again, this is an experiment. We have monthly here. I'm so grateful for Venture Cafe and CIC. CIC's mission is to fix the world through innovation. Venture Cafe's mission is to connect people to build a better world, connect, educate, and learn. NewView Media's is to engage, educate, and encourage action. And ultimately, NewViews is to improve our civic messaging. So I hope everyone out there connected more dots. Feel free to let us know what you thought. We'll try and send out information surveys, all that stuff. But ultimately, I'm just in gratitude. Thank you so much for participating. You guys are so amazing, and thank you for all the work you've put in and will continue to put in. And let's go out there and do it. Let's go out there and put in the energy it takes to build a better world. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you.